Welcome to Aging Insights. I'm Melissa Chalker, Deputy Director of the New Jersey Foundation for Aging. The Foundation's mission is to enable seniors to live with independence and dignity in their communities. Aging Insights is produced by the New Jersey Foundation for Aging to provide information and resources to boomers, seniors, and caregivers. The primary focus of the program is to provide important information and connect people with community-based programs. On this episode, we're going to talk about financial abuse and fraud. Many seniors fall victim to financial exploitation, whether it be by a stranger or even a family member or friend. There are systems in place to assist older adults and their families. Today we're joined by two individuals who do this work. I have in studio today with me Maria Aberasturi, a social work supervisor with the Bergen County Adult Protective Services, and Sergeant Sylvia Presto, a certified fraud examiner of the Bergen County Prosecutors Office. Thank you both for joining me today. I know that you both have busy schedules, and so I appreciate your time. And so I wanted to have you here today, obviously, to talk about exactly what we've just mentioned. Maria, I did want to start with you because we mentioned that you work for Adult Protective Services, which sometimes people refer to with the acronym APS. Yeah. But I'm not sure if our audience knows what that is. So would you mind sharing a little bit about what Adult Protective Services does?
Yes. Adult Protective Services is the government agency that is responsible for investigating abuse, neglect, and exploitation of vulnerable adults. And vulnerable adults are persons over the age of 18 living in the community who are unable to act in their own best interest and are subject to abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Every county has their own agency, and in Bergen County, we're out of the Bergen County Board of Social Services.
Right. And so that is one important thing that I wanted people to know. One, that there's an office, Adult Protective Service office in every county, all 21 counties of New Jersey, and that I don't think people realize when they think about, first of all, I'm not sure how many people realize there is an office that does such a thing, but I'm also not sure that they realize that it's for people 18 and over. People might think of it as just something for older adults, but it really extends to anyone 18 and over who might have the inability to really monitor themselves. Is that right?
That's correct, and that is important because we do work with people with developmental disabilities, physical disabilities, and mental illness.
Right. Right. And you mentioned, that it's abuse, neglect, and of course this financial exploitation issue that we're going to get into. So when it comes to things like neglect, I know there are sometimes people might call your office with, say, a concern about a neighbor who's, maybe missed some doctor's appointments, or they notice their mail is piling up. Is that something that would be an appropriate referral to Adult Protective Services?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the self-neglect referrals are probably the largest proportion of referrals that we do receive.
Wow, that's amazing. And then so the other typical thing that people might think of is that if someone really is in physical harm, right, that if someone is physically abusing someone, then they would call an Adult Protective Service office for assistance with that matter as well.
Yes, if the person is a vulnerable adult, yes, that we would be the appropriate phone call, in addition to calling law enforcement.
Right. And I did want to make one clarification with that, too, for the people watching at home, that if this is an individual that's in a facility, they wouldn't necessarily call your office. There's a different place to call for that type of abuse, correct?
That's correct. For elderly persons in a facility, that would be the Office of the Ombudsman that would be contacted.
Great. So I just wanted to get kind of that stuff out of the way and clarify that for our audience so that they know what they would call Adult Protective Services for. And as we get into it, I think we're going to define a little bit more some of those things that we're talking about. But I know that you have a great relationship with the prosecutor's office, so I wanted you to share a little bit about how that came about and how you and Sylvia began to work together.
Yeah, it was actually, it's an interesting story. In Bergen County, we have an organization called Save Abused and Frail Elderly, SAFE, and they run elder abuse awareness conferences. And during the planning process for the second conference, we were talking about speakers and who might come and speak from a law enforcement perspective. And I had suggested contacting the Hunterdon County Prosecutors Office APS liaison. Our freeholder at the time, Bernadette McPherson, said, well, why would we have someone come all the way up from Hunterdon County? Why don't we just have our Bergen County liaison speak? And I said, because we don't have one. And she said, well, we need one. After that meeting, I contacted our prosecutor, John Molinelli. Within a week, we were meeting with representatives from the prosecutor's office. And after our first meeting, they said they knew exactly who was going to be perfect to work with us. And that's how Sergeant Sylvia Presto came to be our APS liaison.
Great. And I don't know, maybe Sylvia, you could tell us exactly what that means, that you're a liaison for the Adult Protective Services Office. What exactly, how does that role operate?
Our office created a liaisonship which led to a collaborative effort between our office, law enforcement, and Bergen County APS to combat this issue of financial abuse, and not only financial abuse, but also elder abuse in general. But in particular, the financial aspect of it, which is handled by our white-collar crime unit. And we work together collaboratively. We share information. I have gone out on APS calls with Maria's office. Her investigators have accompanied me when I was investigating a financial exploitation case, and it's been very successful. And the lines of communication have been very good in dealing with and investigating this very important issue.
Wow, that's fascinating that you have that kind of relationship. And I did want to touch back, Maria, to the fact that you said there was someone in Hunterdon County, and that's how this kind of started. I'm taking it that not all counties have a liaison. Do you have any idea of how many do, or?
You know, I'm not quite sure how many do, but I do know not every county has a liaison with the prosecutor's office. And our prosecutor took it a step further and had Sylvia trained. So she's a certified adult protective services worker, you know, which makes the relationship between their office and our office so much better.
Sure. So maybe you could give me some examples, or maybe walk me through what would happen if someone called your office with a complaint, and at what point you might involve Sylvia in that.
Typically, people will call us if they have a suspicion that someone's being financially exploited and they can't act in their own best interest. Our social worker will go out, interview the person. We get as much information as we possibly can regarding their finances. If we take a look at the finances, or even from the phone call, it sounds like a law has been broken, that's when we contact the prosecutor liaison. We share the information that we have. The liaison will sometimes come out and interview the client with us, speak with family, and then, you know, as a forensic accountant, they're able to look at the documents in a different way than we are.
I think that sounds like it's the most beneficial part. One of the most beneficial parts of that relationship is that they have that expertise to be able to assist you in resolving these issues and getting justice for the victim, which we're going to get to a little bit later as well. But I did want to back up and make sure our audience understands what financial exploitation is, because we've talked about it a couple times now, and I'm not sure if people really understand what that means. So if you could give us some definitions as what falls under financial exploitation.
Financial exploitation is the illegal or improper use of an elder person, which is defined at New Jersey as age 60 or older. The illegal or improper use of an elder person's money and or property.
Okay. And what are some ways in which that might occur?
There are a number of ways. It could be anything from obtaining a reverse mortgage, forgery, in the sense that someone is writing checks on another person's behalf and forging their signature, sweetheart scams, grandparent scams, or misuse of a durable power of attorney, which seems to be very common in New Jersey, in particular Bergen County.
Right, and I do want to touch on that, but just in case people don't know what a sweetheart scam is, could one of you define that as well?
Yes, a sweetheart scam would happen this way. Usually involves an elder man who is suddenly befriended by a much younger woman. They become friends, and as a result of that relationship, she is able to either A, get access to his money without a durable power of attorney, or B, through the misuse of a durable power of attorney, in which he has given her power, created that fiduciary relationship for her to become his agent. But she misuses it for her own benefit. It's not to say that it doesn't happen in reverse, but the most common is an older man with a younger woman.
Right. Okay, gotcha. So the other thing I wanted our audience to know is that if something like this, if a sweetheart scam or you know, any of these misuse of forgery or things start to happen to someone that they know, what signs might they be able to see, or what things should they be looking for to tell if this is happening to a loved one?
Good question. the normal danger signs or signals, if you will, is a new best friend, someone who the family never saw in the person's life before. The older person may suddenly become isolated, where this new best friend isolates them from their family and/or their friends that they have a support system with.
Right.
Basically, they come into their life and they start to control the person, whether it's socially, emotionally, or sometimes physically. We've seen that as well.
Right. Great.
Yeah.
So
and there'll be changes in spending as well.
Yes.
You'll see
Right.
changes in the way a person banks, and in particular their spending habits. You know,
Right.
somebody who, you know, a $25 gift was a big deal for them, and now they're giving $25,000 gifts, going into savings. You know, a lot of our seniors don't want to touch their savings, and you know, you'll see changes in their spending patterns.
Sure. So obviously, finances and talking about money sometimes is difficult for people to do with their family, and sometimes, especially with older adults, you don't want to insult them or make them feel like they've done something wrong or that they're, you know, feeble now or something because they're older. So do you have any advice for family members who might notice these changes and what they can do or how they can you know, approach that subject with them if they're afraid to do so?
I think conversations need to start before a person's a senior. You know, that it's important to understand where people's finances are, where your parents' finances are, where they keep their important documents, and, you know, to have that kind of honest conversation and plan for the future, you know, should something happen where you need to step in.
Right.
So I would say that's probably, you know, the most important thing. You
Right.
start before you have to.
Sure. And, you know, I think, as I said in the opening, the purpose of the show really is to provide people with this information so that they know what to do should they get in this situation. So say I'm you know, I'm concerned that my mother someone might be taking advantage of her. She's got this new friend that Sylvia told us about, and I see changes in her finances, and so I call your office. What would happen after that? What would you tell me that the next step is? What should I expect if I call to happen for my mother?
When a person calls Adult Protective Services, we get as much information as possible that we can get from them. The Adult Protective Services social worker will then visit the client within 3 business days. Normally, our initial visits are unannounced. You know, we do that so that people can't set a stage to make things look right when they're not.
Sure.
During that interview, we're looking to determine whether or not the person is vulnerable, can they act in their own best interest, and if we think that there are signs of abuse or financial exploitation. We have 30 days to complete our investigation. After initially meeting the client, we will then contact financial institutions, reach out to other family members, other friends, and we also have to interview the alleged perpetrator. If at any time we think that a crime has been committed, we're mandated to report that to local law enforcement.
Right. Great. I think that is very helpful for people to understand the process of what happens, because we might say, oh, you know, if you suspect something, call, but they don't know what happens after they make the call. So I think it's important to shed light on that for people. Sylvia, you did mention durable power of attorney.
Yes.
And I do want to get back to that. If you could, you know, kind of define for us what a power of attorney is.
Sure. A power of attorney is a legal instrument in which a relationship is created. It's a fiduciary relationship that says that the principal, this person giving away the power, gives power to an agent to act in the principal's best interest. The fiduciary relationship requires the agent to act in a trustworthy manner.
Right.
So basically what that means is the agent becomes the principal and stands in that person's shoes, becomes them, and should act as if the principal would act if they had the capacity to do so.
Right.
Meaning go to the bank, write their bills, give gifts to other people, that kind of thing. You basically become that person's agent.
Right. So people understand, because I think it's a very good definition. So people understand if I felt that there would be a time where I'm incapacitated and I wanted someone to act in my behalf, I could give you power of attorney.
Yes.
And that would mean that you could write checks in my name.
Yes.
You could withdraw money from my accounts because
Yes.
I've given you permission to do so via a power of attorney.
Yes.
Okay. There are different types, though, of power of attorney, and I think that gets complicated for people. So if you could find a way to explain that to us, that's a little bit easy to understand.
Sure. There are two types of durable powers of attorney. One is a springing power of attorney, and it does just that. It springs into action at a further date. So it springs into action when the person loses capacity,
Okay.
meaning you're healthy today, you execute a springing power of attorney, but it doesn't take effect until you get sick and you can't act in your own behalf.
Okay.
The other type, and the most common, is a durable power of attorney. DPOA is the acronym. And that is a very important distinction because it becomes effective on the date that it is executed. So theoretically, Melissa, I could give you power of attorney, durable power of attorney over me today. I could leave this studio, you could go to my bank, and you can take all my money out.
Right.
Because it's effective on the date that it's executed. The reason for it, and it is a good reason, the reason for it is that it eliminates the need in the future if I were to become incapacitated, and then someone would have to go into the court system on my behalf and apply for either a guardianship or a conservatorship.
Right.
So it eliminates that for the future. So it is good in its intent.
Right.
However, if it's in the hands of the wrong person, it becomes, in my opinion, a legal license to steal from that person.
Sure, sure. So you can see how the intent of it, as you said, is
Yes.
a good intent. It's,
Yes.
it's a tool to help people be able to give permission to someone else to handle their affairs
Yes.
if they become ill. And it takes out that step of having to say, you know, okay, this person is not able to do this, so now I'm going to do it. If you have the immediate power of attorney, durable power of attorney, then you can just go and do that. But as you say, in the hands of the wrong person, it can become a very bad thing. So what are some things that people should know as they're going in and considering doing a power of attorney? What are some things they should look out for before they sign that paper?
They should be aware that when that instrument is fully executed, that the agent has the power at that moment to do whatever they want with the person's property.
Right.
Included in that document is a gift provision. And the gift provision says that the agent can gift money or property away from the principal. Now, the reason why that's in there, the way I understand it, is that most of them will say, the gift provision, you can gift away in accordance with the IRS tax code, whatever that number is. So that's a way for a person to reduce the size of their estate for tax purposes. Right. However, in my experience, what I've seen is that the perpetrator will use that gift provision to write checks to themselves and or others and then say, well, the principal said I could do that when they had capacity, they told me I could do it, and that's a problem.
Right. Yeah, I can see how that...
So they need to be aware of that
Right.
Although I know the intent of it, when they execute that DPOA, my recommendation would be to limit what can be gifted and or eliminate the gift provision in its entirety.
Right.
But of course, they would have to consult with their attorney about
Right.
that.
So I did want to get to that part of a power of attorney, because technically you don't need a lawyer to execute one, right? You could print them off the internet, sample ones, and just fill in the names and sign them, and they're effective.
That's
they're
correct.
Legal documents.
Yes.
But if you have questions or concerns, it is important to consult a lawyer or other professional that might be able to assist with figuring out, like you're talking about, these gift provisions and what I should or should not
Yes.
give, right? Okay.
Yes.
And we talked about, you're talking about these sweetheart scams or these, new best friends who might pop up and take advantage of someone in that way. But sometimes this does happen with actual family members too, right?
Yes.
So, it gets a little bit more difficult to know for an older adult when it's okay to give someone power of attorney. Who's trustworthy and who's not is kind of tricky, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And statistics have shown that most abuse is committed by a relative. Therefore, the amount of financial exploitation is underreported. That's what the literature review is saying. That's usually a family member,
Right.
and it's underreported. So what we know is that about $2.9 billion of financial exploitation occurs nationwide.
Wow.
That's of 2010.
Right.
But if we accept this being true, that it's underreported, then it may be much more than that.
Yeah, it must be. It's really awful. Given that we've talked about some of these different examples, I didn't know, Maria, if you could share with us maybe some case examples, names excluded,
Yes,
obviously,
yes.
but some case examples maybe of some individuals that you've encountered, or maybe even that you and Sylvia have worked on together.
There was a sweetheart scam that Sylvia did work with us on. An elderly gentleman, he was a survivor of the Holocaust, so he didn't have family, but he did have close friends. And he was hospitalized. 2 young women introduced themselves to him when he was in the hospital and said that they would come home and take care of him. They moved themselves into their house and became quite comfortable there. And then one of the women said that she had cancer and that she needed surgery, and she had no insurance, and she needed $50,000 for an operation. He gave it to her. He had become quite fond of them. She disappeared for a couple of weeks, came back with a shaved head, and they asked for more money for other things. The family friend became concerned and called Adult Protective Services Friday afternoon.
That's when all these things happen, right?
And Friday afternoon, we were able to get in touch with Sylvia, who went out with local law enforcement to see what was going on. Initially, this gentleman did not want to prosecute, did not want these women removed from his home, did not want to work with Adult Protective Services, and he had capacity. So Adult Protective Services stepped out because when a person with capacity tells us that they don't want our services, we respect that self-determination and we leave.
Right.
The local detective kept on top of it, kept visiting, and it took about a year, but this gentleman came to see that these women really weren't acting in his best interest, and they ended up being arrested and charged with his exploitation. That was a sweetheart scam. Unfortunately, we see a lot more of family members taking advantage and using these powers of attorney. What I usually call it is the advance inheritance. Children seem to think that they have a right to their parents' money because they're going to inherit it someday. And sometimes parents see it in the same way. We actually had another case where roughly $875,000 was exploited from an elderly gentleman by his son using a durable power of attorney. He took everything, businesses, property, credit cards, and the elder died impoverished.
Wow.
And he was 96 years old.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, these are really shocking stories, especially when you consider the fact that family might be involved. But a couple of things from both of those examples that struck me is, one, that the first gentleman with the sweetheart scam didn't think anything was wrong with the situation he was in to begin with. And then when you talk about, a son taking advantage and how the parent might say, oh, well, this is my son, I want to give him these things. So I get the feeling that perhaps sometimes victims are a little bit reluctant to either come forward or to participate in an investigation, to be a willing, a willing participant in the investigation and giving you information on that person.
They don't want to be victims. They don't want to perceive themselves as being victims. With the sweetheart scams, and I think with families, they're playing on people's emotions. I mean, people love their children.
Right.
No one wants to think that their child would steal from them. And, when you're older and you're isolated and alone and somebody, is interested in you and wants to spend time with you, no one wants to think that that person is doing that just so they want their money.
Sure.
So it's difficult.
Are there techniques or things that you've said to victims to get them to come around, or things that you would say now to people watching to let them know that it's okay to come forward and that it's not something to be necessarily ashamed of if this has happened to them, that it's okay to admit it and it's okay to prosecute, I guess, in a sense?
That would be my message to the victim. It's much like a victim who says that, you know, I did something wrong. They feel that they did something wrong with executing this document.
Right.
So my message would be, you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything to cause this.
Right.
But if you go through the right agencies, meaning Adult Protective Services, and report it to law enforcement through a collaborative effort, we may be able to help you. There's no guarantee that we're going to be able to prosecute. And that's really not what the victim wants all the time.
Right.
And there's no guarantee we can get the money back, but we can certainly try.
Right.
Because there have been instances where we've been able to get a deed put back into the person's name when it's been taken from them
Right.
without their permission.
Right. And I know, you know, getting into some of that stuff might take us more time than we have left at this point, but I did want to touch a little bit on those because there is a difference between criminally prosecuting and civilly
Yes.
prosecuting, right?
Yes. Yes, the difference is with the criminal, they'd have to break a criminal law. It would either be theft, embezzlement, but there is a statute for elder abuse. It's 2C 24-8. What we would have to prove is that the agent, not the agent, the person who, the perpetrator, that the perpetrator had a legal duty to take care of that person or was taking care of that person on a continuous basis and assumed that responsibility,
Right.
which resulted in either neglect or physical abuse. But it doesn't cover financial.
Okay.
So that's a problem with that law.
Sure.
It's only for physical neglect or failing to take care of the person's needs other than financial.
But there might be instances, especially with family members, where an individual is taking money but might also be neglectful
That's
of the
correct.
senior, so that they might see some justice in that way if they're both types of
Yes,
abuse are involved.
They often go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And sometimes the act of financially exploiting a person actually does need to neglect, especially, you know, with Medicaid and Medicaid regulations,
Right.
that, you know, seniors can be penalized for that money that their power of
Right.
attorney has taken from them, and then they're unable to receive the services that they really
Right.
need. So sometimes the exploitation actually does lead to neglect.
That's an excellent point, if I may address that. There are a lot of times where Medicaid will look at a financial exploitation case and ask the question, was the person charged with a criminal offense? And if the person has not been, then Medicaid denies the application because of the 5-year look-back period.
Right.
They say that the victim intentionally pauperized themselves,
Wow.
so they would qualify for Medicaid.
Right.
And that's not always the
Not always
case.
the
Right.
case. That's very unfortunate, as you've said, you know, that this would be the end result for that person, and that, you know, the financial abuse really can lead to actual abuse or neglect in that way. I thank you again both for your time and for your knowledge on the subject.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aging Insights is produced by the New Jersey Foundation for Aging and is made possible by donations to the foundation. To become a sponsor for Aging Insights programs, please go to our website at www.njfoundationforaging.org or call our office at 609-421-0206. All of the previous shows may be viewed on our website. We want to remind you to find out about senior services in your area, please contact your county offices on aging. Their numbers are on our website, and you may call the state hotline at 1-877-222-3737. Thank you for watching this episode of Aging Insights, and remember, aging is everyone's business.